Next, we have Gabrielle Richard with the title Cybersexism, Digital Sociabilities and Gendered Identities at Play. A lot of complicated words. A warm welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm from the Université de Paris-Est Créteil, so I'll be presenting some data relating to the French context. Some preliminary considerations before we start. The data I'll be presenting is about cybersexism in high school, which is the French version of collège and lycée, is high school. And we have for about, I'd say 15 years in France, we have documented school climate by passing and having students fill out school climate surveys. These were aiming at documenting how safe the students felt at school and how much they were or were not the victims and the witnesses and the bullies during intimidation and bullying episodes. And only recently, I'd say around 2012, only recently we have heard about, or not heard about, but the phenomenon of cyberbullying has come up in this data in a very significant manner. This can be due to many things. We know that the use of cell phones is on the rise in France and I'm sure pretty much elsewhere, everywhere. And we know that currently more than 89% of 15-year-old French kids are on one or more social networks, so it's quite important in their lives. So they use, most of them use Facebook, then Twitter, and then Snapchat is increasingly popular as well. So these school climate studies have paid a lot of attention on how these episodes could play out differently or affect differently boys and girls. And we usually report in France and in most countries as well that I've heard about, we report that girls are consistently more likely than boys to report having been victimized online, while it's quite the opposite for boys. So boys are more, so the victims and the bullies, what we call in real life or in face-to-face interactions in schools. And it's quite the opposite when it comes to cyberbullying. So there's a real dimension related to gender that we have to study. But until recently, French studies have not paid much attention on this very real gender dimension, except these statistical analysis that I've just told you about. So there was, I feel, an important lack in the research regarding this. This is specifically the case because we know, and we have known for a while, that these instances of violence, I'm talking about cyberbullying, but it's the case for most of the violence at school, these instances of violence are massively gendered. We talked about the fact that they affect boys and girls differently. That's the case, of course, but also they are often highly sexist in nature. They are often sexual, so there's a real power dynamic relating to sexuality that we just heard about. And they are often, we've heard about this today a lot, they are often homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic in nature. So there's a real, there's a real need for this gendered analysis, and so that's the need that we wanted to fill out with this study on cybersexism. So here it comes. So presenting data on the very first study on cybersexism in French schools that was undertaken last school year, so 2015-2016. The aim was quite simply to try to better understand the gender dimensions of this phenomenon. Methodology-wise, we had two phases in this survey. The first phase, I'll go quite quickly because I'm not presenting on this today, but that's quite interesting, I think, to know. So that was a survey questionnaire that was filled out by 1,127 high school students. So I'm talking about youth that are between 12 and 16. And so they were filled out during a period of class, and they completed it. So they were from 12 different high schools in the, what we call Région Île-de-France, which is the immediate city of Paris and its immediate surroundings. And the qualitative part of the study, which is the one I'll be mostly presenting on this afternoon, consisted of focus groups that we conducted and individual interviews as well that were conducted with 415 students from the same ages that I talked about, and with 48 adults. These are all, so the youth and the adults are all in the same 12 schools. And they were the same 12 schools that the survey questionnaires were fielding previously. Some words on the methodology. So we organized 34 focus groups during a class period as well. They were students from 17 classes that were split up into smaller groups. The idea was to, well, first of all, try to create a climate that was more welcoming and more inclusive for everyone to talk about these issues that can be, of course, very sensitive. And also we wanted to try to see how we could have different content depending on if the groups were split up along gender lines or not. So we of course, it created different interview dynamics. And individual interviews were with 13 students. These were students that took part in the focus groups, and after the focus groups had told us that they wanted to have an individual interview because there were things they wanted to talk to us about that were more private, etc. So 13 students and the 48 adults, they were various adults in the school environment. We're talking about teachers, administrators, counselors, nurses, etc. So to try to circumvent sometimes very tricky power dynamics when we talk about violence in class, especially when we talk about this when we're in the classroom with the students. So to try to circumvent that, we wanted to present the focus groups with a scenario. So have them talk about a scenario instead of having them talk about what's going on with their peers. We thought that might open the conversation a little more. So one of the scenarios read as follows, I'm reading. So Manon, the first name of a girl, Manon takes a picture of herself in order to look seductive. She sends it to friends she trusts. The picture is then leaked to social networks and sent out to students' cell phones. She receives many comments. So that was exactly what we read to them at the beginning of the focus groups, and then asked them, so what do you think happened? Why do you think she received comment? What types of comments, etc. So that's how we got the conversation going with them. In order to see how an episode of cybersexism can come to unfold, I like to use the term unfold because you'll see why. It's more clear when we see. I'll try to reconstitute a specific episode that happened that was told to us in an individual interview by a 13-year-old girl that we will call Livia. So she had requested this interview with us. We met with her and talked for about an hour and 15 minutes about something that had happened to her the previous year. So she was 13 at the time of the interview, so that happened to her when she was 12. She had, at the time, been dating this boy her age at school, and she had been dating him for 7 to 8 months, so he was her regular boyfriend. And here's what she tells us about it. Try to not be in the way for you. So she says, we were talking on the phone, and I told him I was about to get in the shower. He said, cool, would you take a picture for me? Of course, I knew that he was a boy, that he wanted to see girls. I'm not stupid. I said, I don't really want to. He then told me, when I ask for pictures, girls always send them to me. And he started to insult me. You're a slut, things like that. Interviewer. Moving on, that's quite a long quote. Interviewer, what did you think when he said that to you? Well, I'm not naive, but I thought, I trust him. I will send him one, and it will make him happy. I didn't think there were any risks. So you then took a picture? Yes, I had positioned my hand in such a way to hide my body, and I sent the picture. When I called him back, he said, good. So whenever you're a bitch to me, I know what I can do with it. So, of course, it's quite easy to see that in this quote, there are two very clear trigger elements. The first one is the fact that, of course, the boy pressures Livia to get her pictures by saying she's lacking in comparison to other girls, by insulting her, etc. So she's forced to send the picture, even though she initially and verbally said that she did not consent to it. And the second trigger happens, of course, a few minutes after she sends the picture, when she calls him back, and he says, he intends to keep the picture in case she's ever, quoting him, a bitch to him. In other words, what was initially intended for private use between boyfriend and girlfriend literally becomes what in French we call a dossier, which literally means a folder, which could be like a revenge file. So the boyfriend keeps this in case she's a bitch to him, and then he can take this picture out and publicly humiliate her. You might not be surprised to learn what happens next, unfortunately. She tells us, so that day we had a stupid argument, and he posted the picture on Facebook. Everyone at school saw it. Students threatened to send it to my parents. Anywhere I walked, people stared at me. People teased me. So, Olivia, you like taking pictures of yourself? I was called a slut. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? They said. So, of course, we now see the third trigger element, meaning that an argument between, again, only two people, boyfriend and girlfriend, leads him to put the picture up on Facebook. The picture then moves from private use to public use, initially via the cyberspace, but then contaminates the entire school environment because she hears about it in class, she hears about it in the hallways, etc. An example of that. Girls would call me names, talk behind my back. I felt really uneasy. There was this girl who was supposed to be my best friend. She took advantage of the situation. She laughed at me and also sent out the photo, so sent it to other people. It was the worst year. What is interesting about this study is because we conducted, as I told you previously, focus groups and interviews in the same school with various people in the same school, we were able to see how what happened to Livia impacted some of her peers. So it came up in other focus groups and other interviews we had. Students from not only her grade, but older and younger students as well, reported having heard about this specific episode involving Livia. Here are a few quotes on that. So Najette, she's 15, so she's 2 years older than Livia. She says, even kids who haven't seen her picture have heard about it, that's for sure. Asking, so interviewer, so students from other classes too? Madam, students from other cities knew about it. In another focus group, Tracy, she told us, so she's a year older than Livia. She says, it happened here. A girl had sent out a picture of her body. Everyone sent it around because they felt she shouldn't have shown herself. Nobody talked to her after that. Vina, everyone at school was talking about that picture, sorry. Tracy, and called her names. At 12, you show your body, you ugly bitch. Of course, it is impossible to ignore the very nature of the harassment that Livia reported going through. It's literally what we call slut shaming. But what was interesting to us, one of the questions that we had while we conducted this study was, how do the students themselves make sense of this? How do they understand these issues? And I found fascinating is that many of them told us that there were sort of special rules that you had to follow when you were online. So there are things you can and can't do, and you should know about these things. So it can be regarding the type of profile picture that you're allowed to put up, the type of comment that you could write on someone's picture or something, the type of thing that you can like, etc. So we asked them to tell us a little bit more about that. Here's a quote from Levi, 15-year-old boy. The worst thing that can happen to a girl is to have her image degraded. If there's a naked picture of her going around, everybody will think she will put out. So the very idea that the picture, or the naked picture, or whatever you call it, represents in itself the possibility. Another boy said, and I remember this clearly, he said, when you see a picture, a naked picture of a girl, it means, one, you are allowed to harass her, and two, you are allowed to ask to have sex with her. That's what it means in their words. Sarah. A girl that takes a picture in a bikini deserves to be called out on it. She's being vulgar. Okay, what makes it vulgar? Well, it depends on the bikini. Sarah says, it depends on where she is. If she's at the beach, then it may be okay. But at home, it means she showed herself on purpose. Marie-Ève, but she cannot remove her bra strap. Estelle, a boy can't really be vulgar. He can never show too much of his body. Carla, yes, girls have to protect themselves. Indeed, the girls have to preserve their reputation. They have to preserve their reputation. They're expected to produce proofs of their femininity via their bodily attributes, their makeup, their clothes, etc., in order to be deemed desirable by their male peers. But they have to do so while maintaining some sort of innocence, some sort of purity, while maintaining their reputation, and that's where it becomes difficult. Cyberspace becomes another place where they can fail to do so. So a few examples that were given to us during the focus groups of ways what girls could do that deserve to be called sluts afterwards. So if they take a picture or a video of them that is deemed inappropriate, so deemed inappropriate, that's very large. If they send it out, even if they did not intend to send it out. If they have it sent out with or without their consent. If they show too much interest in boys by commenting on pictures, for example. If they're too interested in sexuality, etc., etc. So there are many, many examples. A girl can also have her reputation tarnished by association, so by associating with another girl that is being slut-shamed or has been slut-shamed. The rules differ for boys. Boys who appear to be the most popular with their peers are those who are considered man enough or heterosexual enough. This can be done during, for example, peer interactions, either offline or online. I have examples of that as well. So boys have to steer clear of not looking or not acting man enough. I think the best way to explain this is with examples. So here are two examples showing how this can play out in face-to-face interactions and then online. Youssef. So, when boys touch each other's butts, there are rules. There are things we can't do. Okay, what are these things? You can't cry. You can't touch private parts, like the penis. You have to laugh. When you touch your friend's butt, it's supposed to be funny. You have to laugh. Youssef. And you can't pinch the butt either. Interviewer. So pinching is not allowed? Youssef, no. Otherwise, it becomes a faggot thing. Another example of how this can play out in cyberspace this time. Adele saying, on Facebook or Snapchat, a boy can show his abs and his chest and not be called names. But if he acts in a weird way, if he lowers his t-shirt over his shoulder, he will be told he's weird. And then other people in the group commented, yes, he's mentally ill, he's gay, etc. So of course, as you can imagine, students have to pay a lot of attention to the pictures of themselves that end up online. Girls who put online pictures of them that are considered inappropriate by their peers can be then doubly blamed. Once for not having correctly understood the gender expectations that target them as girls, and the second time for being naive enough to think that this picture would not be disseminated. So there's this sort of double blame going on. They therefore deserve to be called slut, of course. Some elements of conclusion. The Olivia episode allows us to see what can trigger an episode of cybersexism and how it can come to be known throughout an entire school. So we saw that it was initially between two people, and then it was sent out to friends, and then it was known in the school environment, et cetera, et cetera. So contrary to popular beliefs that tend to link cyberbullying and what we call stranger danger, Cybersexism can come to play out in environments where, well, the bullies, the victims, and the witnesses, they know each other, they know of each other, they know their reputation, etc. The type of event I've told you about is far from exceptional. Every school that took part in the study had such a story to share with us, sometimes more than one. These are, of course, brutal for the girls, or sometimes the boy, but of course, most of the time for the girls involved. But what's interesting is that they also contribute in a very real way to the online dissemination of gender norms and expectations. So these affect all students, tarnishing the girl's reputation, as I mentioned, and threatening the boy's masculinity. And last element, cyberspace has to be understood as another way, as another place to prove one is the right gendered version of oneself. We have seen how girls, but also boys, can be put back into their gendered place in cyberspace. So cyberspace asks of girls to be disproportionately vigilant towards their online image. They're expected to present as respectable while performing heterosexual femininity. This necessitates them to exert a very rigorous control on their online image. And this control, of course, is hardly compatible with the very characteristics of cyberspace and social networks themselves. Meanwhile, boys' misdemeanors are also policed, but appear to be forgiven more easily. All in all, I think we can say that cybersexism has to be considered a new way to socially control the gender order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this paper on cybersexism? It's really interesting, really tragic to hear the rules you have to abide to become male or female or anything other than that. So thank you very much.